This is the IDP After Show.
So this one feels like a no-brainer for number one. But who have you got at one and why?
Jalen? No, I'm just kidding. I got Micah Parsons number one. I think a lot of rankers and stuff have him as their number one IDP overall. He plays every down, crazy sack potential, an absolute monster. So I think that's pretty easy to put him up at the top of this list. And then after that, I think it gets very interesting. But let's put my list together. I mean, obviously, he's the first name that pops up in most conversations, and especially getting the edge tag in MFL and in sleeper. If he happens to have dual designation in sleeper, then that feels even better. So I think that's an easy one. I kind of took my list in like a redraft-y kind of way, kind of looking at this year, not really looking too much into the future. So I think that might give some credence to some of the later picks in the list. But obviously Micah Parsons is an easy one for sure.
Yeah. I mean, what else is there to say about Parsons that we haven't already said a million times? He's my number one ranked IDP in redraft and in Dynasty for that matter, albeit in a tier with maybe 4 or 5 others. The IDP show, I've been running a series of mocks in recent months. I think we're up to something like 42, 43 completed drafts now. Well on our way to trying to achieve triple figures with the IDP Madness tournament. And as you might guess, Parsons occupies the top spot in that ADP. I think there's only been a handful of drafts where he hasn't been taken number one. 90 pressures, 14 sacks, 52 combined tackles, 3 forced fumbles. He only turned 24 last month. I mean, kind of makes you wonder where this can go if he can avoid major injuries, right? The sky really is the limit. Yeah, he's everything you want and more. Did you see him complaining about the price of a pickleball pass ticket the other day on Twitter?
I missed that.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of funny for a guy who earned so much. But one person responded by saying that he'd be surprised, Parsons would be surprised when he sees how much the Cowboys charge for a game, which I thought was kind of cool. Parsons was my number one, unsurprisingly, for all the reasons I just mentioned. So let's move on to your number two.
Okay, so I think this is where it gets fun positionally. I actually went with Haason Reddick. He tied, I guess, depending on how the half sacks are counted, for sacks last year. The Eagles lost a little bit of their rotation, and I know they added Nolan Smith, but obviously Haason Reddick played in that rotation and played extremely well. So I kind of thought about maybe going, and some of my other picks kind of go to other positions, but I just thought that the value that he's bringing, and I think he's 26 or something like that, is just unmatchable. I think in that second spot. What did he have, like 16 sacks last year, a good number of tackles, again, playing a lot of snaps, even in a heavy rotation that the Eagles tend to deploy. And I don't think that changes too much, but I still think that what he kind of gives you all that stud potential, maybe he's a little bit undervalued, kind of in drafts. He's kind of going a little bit lesser known, just because it was kind of the 1 year. And he bounced around before that through a couple different systems. But that's kind of where I went with the second one. I'm interested to see, because I think this division, I think, like I said before, but it's just so wide open of who the best players are and who the best IDPs are going to be. So I'm excited to see what we got going on here for sure. It's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I expected, I also have Reddick as number 2, and I kind of expected us both to have Parsons and Reddick 1 and 2. It's beyond that. I think it starts to get interesting. I think there's a really flat tier of players, from maybe the 3 all the way up to 10, or 3 to 8, maybe at least. So yeah, I was pretty vocal at this time last year about how Reddick would need to produce a higher pressure rate to sustain the number of sacks that he was producing, and he did exactly that, right? 24 more pressures than he had in 2021, ending with 68 total pressures, 18 sacks, 6 forced fumbles. It's crazy, right? Only 28 tackles, but who cares when he's making big plays so often? The question is, I guess, can it continue? I think it's sensible to expect those numbers to drop a little bit, the sacks and the forced fumbles, at least. Not because I don't like him as a player, but more because it was just such a good year. It's gonna be really hard to sustain that level of production, right? It's a minor negative, the Nolan Smith thing. You know, I know given the competition at the spot, Smith's very unlikely to get a heavy workload in his rookie year, but he is an extra body to account for in that what was a more like a three-man rotation. Brandon Graham did play quite a bit. There's been some talk in IDP circles about the departure of sort of Jonathan Gannon being a bad thing for these edge rushers. I'm kind of less concerned. Sean Desai didn't rotate his edge rushers heavily with the Bears in 2021, and even with the Seahawks when he was the defensive assistant. And the Seahawks being famous for rotating their edge rushers, as we know. Uchenna and Wosu almost got 1,000 snaps. So yeah, I'm pretty bullish on Reddick as number 2 on this list. Have a guess where he's going relative to other DLs in the IDP show mocks I talked about earlier.
I'll say 10.
6.
Okay.
6. So behind Max Crosby and Myles Garrett, but ahead of the likes of Aiden Hutchinson and Brian Burns. How do you feel about that?
Well, they are redraft, right? Their best ball.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's where I think if you're talking dynasty, which is kind of what we did for reacting, I think I would have those guys over him, just at least Hutchinson, just because of the age. Though edge guys do tend to go pretty far in their careers if they're good and they can avoid injuries. So that feels about right. Obviously, the regression to the mean, right? That's if Tom was on here, that's what he'd be talking about. And then you kind of mentioned it too, right? The just having such an amazing year out of what he's done. Even since he's been in college, really was when he was like that dominant pass rusher. Because he hasn't, they try to use him as inside linebacker and stuff like that. And in Arizona, but yeah, I think that's about right. I'd say.
Okay, cool.
This was the IDP After Show.